Okay, whenever you're ready.
Sorry for party rock.
Hold on, I need to prepare. Nothing wrong here.
Alright, but hot take, the best kind of pie is
Alright. Is everything good on the stream? No? Looks good to you. Awesome. Alright, so hello everyone. My name, as you probably know by this point, is Joshua Niemann, and today I'm going to talk to you about some pies. One quick note here. I can't actually read any of my slides today because my glasses decided to die, so if I skip something that you want more information about on screen, just let me know, and someone will look at Twitch chat and tell me, since I can't actually read anything at the moment. But with that said, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about real quick is a recipe for the pies that we're going to be making today. We need a bunch of raspberries. We need some sugar. We need some cornstarch. And we also need a pie crust. Now, you really, really need to just make your own pie crust. And honestly, if you're not making your own pie crust, I don't know what you're doing here. This is a cooking class. You're not ready for this. Just go buy whatever you find at Wegmans. But with that said, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's really all you need to know about pies. Any questions? Oh yeah, that's right, JK. Which is no, he's right. You can't see it on screen because of the camera. So there is a JK there. It's not visible. All right. So back to a different type of pie. Today I'm going to talk about the Raspberry Pi compute platform. And today we're going to look at what is a pie, a bit of history of these particular products, what they do, what kind of software they run, why you should be interested in this, and what kind of projects you could do with it. So a Pi is essentially just a computer. It's a really, really tiny computer about the size of a credit card. The appeal of this product is that it started at $35, and you can use this to do all kinds of certain projects relating to both hardware in addition to servers and just home lab stuff. So the big thing that this Pi has that your computer does not is something called a GPIO pin. So GPIO, which to most of you probably sounds like just a random bunch of letters that, of course, technical acronym has to be here. It stands for General Purpose Input Output. And GPIO is really important because it's what lets you to connect with hardware. So if you have, per se, a relay that lets you turn on or off a circuit, that's going to communicate with a hardware, like some kind of computer, over a general purpose input-output pin. And these pins can either receive input in by looking for a high or a low voltage, or can write output. So that would also use a 1 or a 0 or a high or low voltage. And that's why these particular platforms are so powerful, are because they have the ability to have that level of control, and thus you can do a lot of really cool stuff with this that just isn't possible with a computer because you're missing those GPIO pins. You can run Raspberry Pi relays off here. I've done that before, which basically just turn on or off a signal. You can run LEDs. You can run Pi hats that just extend functionality of the device. Like my roommate has a Pi hat that just sticks on top of the GPIO pins of the Raspberry Pi, and it gives him access to something called Power over Ethernet. So he can just run one cable across the house, and the Raspberry Pi will just pull power from it. So a bit of history here. The Raspberry Pi came out for the first time in about 2012. The creator is up here to the right. His name is Evan Upton, and he had the initial idea of creating a kind of computer that could be used for an educational capacity. So specifically, he wanted to have something that had a video card and the ability to program on the fly on it. Some of his first prototypes ran a version of Python that you could just interact with by typing in and did not have a full operating system. Since then, though, once he actually released the product, Pis have generally used Linux as their primary operating system, although we'll get into that in a bit. The PiOne was also really, really hard to find when it came out. And I might either be showing my age as like a RIT site boomer here, or just paint myself as a giant nerd. But I was actually on the pre-order list for like one of the first Pis, and it took months to get, which is very, very similar to certain hardware shortages we've been having today for other things that are not Pis. There's also a video that I have linked that has a really, really long 45-minute history of the Raspberry Pi that's actually super interesting to watch if you want some time. If you have some time that you want to kill. On the bottom right, I found a meme from when the Pi first came out, and someone was very unhappy with the fact that they could not get it yet because all the sites went down. So I thought that was really, really amusing, so I threw it up there. So let's talk about the PiOne. This is the first product that came out in 2012, and this is it. PiOne was, again, the initial revision. This was very much a beginner product. They were only going to make about 10,000 of these before they realized that their demand was really, really, really high. So it's kind of designed with that in mind. It was designed to be since it was designed to be lower volume, they had to make some shortcuts on terms of the hardware and what can be done with it, because you can't buy parts for the same price at 10,000 units as you can compared to a few million or something like that. But again, the important things here is this device at GPIO, which was huge for projects and stuff like that, has 2 USB ports, and it had RCA video out. The idea is this could be used with just any TV, and at the time, TVs had RCA still. We also have a speaker jack, which I can tell you from experience does not have very high quality audio, but it is in fact there. And we have HDMI. So we have one port from the 20th century, since we're using USB 2 here. 21st century, yes. Thank you, Dan. Also got 10100 Ethernet. That is from the 20th century. And an SD card. So after that particular product took off, Raspberry Pi Foundation, or the organization behind all this, was like, wow, we should do that again. So they did. Although this time, because they were making far more of them, because at this point they were established and not a startup anymore, they had something called a Raspberry Pi 2. And the Pi 2 was like PiOne on steroids. And what I mean by that is that it was quite a bit more powerful. And I have a Pi 2 somewhere here, but I'm not seeing it. Yes, I have a Pi 2 somewhere. If you'd like to see it, come find me later. So the Pi 2B has a quad-core chip, and that's one of the upgrades. The other upgrade is that the GPIO was very much changed, and you have more of it, and also a different form factor. So PiOne accessories that use the GPIO pins are not really compatible with the Pi 2. However, that being said, this particular GPIO configuration has been used ever since. So you can find any particular Pi hat or something and just reuse it with different versions of Pis past the Pi 2. You've also got more memory. The old Pi had about 256 meg, and with a single core and 256 meg of RAM, that was a very, very slow device. Running apt update takes quite a bit of time, actually. But yeah, this really helped things because of the quad-core chip. Also swapped out the SD card for micro, and yeah, and doubled the USB. That's another thing it did. So the Pi 3, which is basically just a Pi 2 that just so happens to have Wi-Fi. That's it. There's really not much different. This is probably the one you'll find. It's the one I've seen most common, in the wild. But it's not really a huge upgrade. It's just clocked a bit higher, and it has fake gigabit Ethernet, which by fake I mean they're running over USB 2, which due to bandwidth restrictions is only able to actually pull like 300 megabit per second, as opposed to a full 1000. So that brings us to a Pi 4. This is the last major revision of this. That is right here. Again, no real huge upgrades here, other than this has USB 3, actual gigabit Ethernet, and a few tweaks to how like displays work, and that's about it. It also has Type-C power, which is basically just the same as before with Micro B, except they changed the connector. So the PiZero is arguably one of the more interesting products they have. This came out after the Pi 3, and this is essentially a PiOne, the form factor of like 2 fingers. It's really, really small, but also really, really cheap. As in, when this came out, I believe it was Linux Magazine. If you were subscribed to Linux Magazine, you would get a Pi with the copy of your magazine because it was so cheap to produce this. They don't come with the GPIO headers by default. Like, you have to buy those. And it's also a bit harder to work with because you have only like 2 micro USB cables and a mini HDMI. So you'll have to like adapt off. But if you're looking for like a small like project or something that you want just a computer for, that you need either with Wi-Fi or without, this is a really, really good option because you can just solder directly onto the GPIO pins, and it only costs $5.
Yeah, it also has the ability to activate USB gadget.
I'll get to that. The point that was brought up was that you can technically use this to act as a USB gadget, and that is something I will bring up later. And what effectively that lets you do is plug in one USB cable to it and run it like a network card. So you can SSH into it from any computer with only one like cable. That part is pretty nice. I will get back to that. So I kind of just want to make you aware this is a thing. It's not like something you're probably going to ever see. I've never actually seen one of these, but this is a Pi Compute module. There's a bunch of revisions of these. It's basically just a standard Pi that they took the internals and shoved it into something that looks like a RAM stick. And that is because on at least some of these compute modules, they are RAM sticks, except they're not. Turns out they just reuse like the form factor of a standard DDR3 RAM disk for laptops. So that what you can do is if you're a company that needs a computer put on a product that you are currently making, and you want access to those GPIO pins, you can just use a standardized connector of some form to literally just plop the Raspberry Pi in there, and it just works. So if you are, I don't know, working in an industrial control system or something, and you want a computer to run your product, but you don't really want to pay a large sum of money for an actual industrial controller, you could use one of these. And these still cost about $35. And if you can engineer your stuff so that it has that like DIMM slot on it, and you can put that in, this is a really, really solid option. The Pi 400 is also a thing that exists, which is a Pi 4 that is shoved in a keyboard. That's it. Like, there's nothing special about that other than it can be really, really useful in education, especially if you're teaching students how to program with one of these. And finally, the Pi Pico. This is a very new product that just came out. It's kind of like a Arduino, except it's not. It's a Pi. But this can run MicroPython and C and C++ code. So this doesn't actually run Linux. But it's $4, which is super cheap. So maybe from the last talk, this could be used to this could actually probably be used as a less sketchy way, less wish.com way to make a rubber ducky, potentially. Finally, Pi-A's. Again, these exist. I don't know if you'll ever see them. The Pi-A is kind of like you'll probably notice that each like Raspberry Pi slide I had, mostly up to this point, had a differentiation of like Pi 2B or Pi 1B. And that's because the Pi-A exists as well, which is like slightly cheaper, $10 off price point of $25. But from our perspective, it's probably really not worth it to buy an A, because for $10 more, you get a lot more I/O and you get a lot more functionality. And if you do need something where budget is that much of a factor, the Zero is probably a better option anyway. Although the Zero is a bit slower, since it's basically the equivalent system specs of a PiOne with only a single core. So Raspberry Pis definitely need software to work, and at this point, I've mentioned that they run Linux, and they can run a lot of different types of Linux. But most likely, the type of Linux that you're going to see is something called Raspbian. So Raspbian is a modified Debian build that has slightly different repositories and is built for ARM-H and ARM64. Generally, the version you're going to see is just by default 32-bit. And while there is only one Pi that would actually benefit from this, which is the Pi 4 8GB, which is also slightly expensive, you can run a 64-bit version of this. You just have to kind of look a bit harder. Yeah, so the Pi 4 comes in a few memory configurations, and really you're not going to see a benefit of a 64-bit system until you get to that 8GB level of memory. But honestly, I do not know why you'd want 8GB of RAM in a Pi. This Pi 4 is only 4GB, which only is still a lot for a small ARM-based computer that you're just going to set up somewhere and leave. But anyway, if you would like to learn more about Raspbian, that link right there will take you straight to the Raspberry Pi site, where you can look at some of the software that comes pre-installed. And you'll notice here that the Pi comes with a lot of learning tools out of the box. It comes with some programming languages. It comes with the basic stuff you would need if you were just to look at a computer and say, what do I need? And it's actually a very solid feature set. And if you do not care about the GUI, it's also available without one. So you can download a kind of light build or server build that will just drop you at a command prompt. And you can use that for something you just SSH into or whatnot. So great, what on earth do I do with this? And I'm going to make an argument here. I think every security major should have one. And the reason I think that is because it's a Linux server the size of your palm. It's really, really convenient just to have a server you can just set up and leave. It runs basically any Linux app and service. So if it runs on if you can get it to run on an ARM platform and it runs on Linux, it will work on here. So web servers, Nginx, all kinds of things. If you just need a Linux box to do a thing and you want to leave it there, unlike a VM where you just suspend, this is a very, very solid option. In addition, the direct hardware access is really nice. I have used GPIO pins in ways I have not expected before, and just learning about the hardware alone is probably worth it enough to spend the $5 on a PiZero. And also, this device can double as a serial adapter. So if you're trying to do some hardware hacking and you find a serial port on something, you can just directly connect the Pi to the serial adapter, run a command, and you have direct console access into that hardware device. It's that simple. So what have I used mine for? To your right, you have a snapshot picture of that I sent to someone of a Raspberry Pi 1 sitting on the roof, or not the roof of my garage that just acted like a garage door opener for a while, several years. You can see I have a relay board right there, and that is what controls the garage door opening and closing. It essentially has it has both ends of the garage door opener button attached to it, and when I run some Python code, that relay via the GPIO pin and the voltage pins on there, that relay goes and clicks, and it shorts those two pins out for a period of time, which causes the door to close. I've also used these for printer redirection. If you've ever found a really old printer that still works and you want to make it networked and not from the 90s, well, you can throw a Pi on that and it will do it. Web servers, already discussed that. Pi-hole. A Pi-hole is a software package that runs on most Raspberry Pi Linux distros, and all it does is acts like a DNS server, except it acts like a DNS server that also has a ton of just giant ad block lists, like you would find in an ad blocker. So this device, if you configure your home router correctly, will act like a whole house ad blocker. And any device you're on, including mobile devices that are not jailbroken, you should not see many ads on the device. There are exceptions to that, like YouTube is a big one, but like overall, it works very, very well. And I have not personally had any major issues with running a Pi-hole. You can set up a media center. There are like game center platforms that you can use for older games. Something called RetroPie can be installed, and you can just play all kinds of old games. You can also use this as a network controller, depending on if you have a advanced network setup that you would actually need such a controller for, like maybe a Ubiquiti access point or something like that. I've also used this particular Pi to fix a bricked router. My roommate had a router that decided not to update, and the only way to fix it was to use GPIO to like console into the device, and that's what I did. But having access to a Pi very quickly was able to solve that problem. You can also transmit FM for some reason. I tried that; it worked. I wouldn't recommend it. It sounds like crap. Yeah, garage door opener, Bluetooth server. This thing has a Bluetooth chip in it, so if you're trying to do any Bluetooth hacking and you want to like experiment, there you go. And also, I've used these for wireless CTFs in the past. So instead of using the Wi-Fi card in my computer, I have this. I'm SSH'd into it, and I can use the Wi-Fi card here. So, how do you get started? Well, first off, you're going to need one of these. And the two recommended retailers, I'd say, are Micro Center and Adafruit. So we don't have a Micro Center around here. But if you do have access to a Micro Center, they sell all the Pis at MSRP, like the price they're supposed to be, and sometimes even lower. This is the wireless variant of the PiZero, and I got this for $5, despite the fact that it retails usually for $10. Adafruit's also a pretty good site, but you will have to pay for shipping there. You can also get some kits on Amazon, and there is a link there for a kit. The only thing I would look for is that it actually has like a legitimate Pi power supply and a rather large or rather fast flash, like SD card. Those are two common issues with Pis. But other than that, that particular kit I linked is a pretty solid option. The reason you want a Pi branded power supply, if you're not using something like Power over Ethernet, is that Pis actually do use a lot of power. This Pi alone, this is kind of notorious for like eating a lot of power. You can pull 3 to 4 amps with this easy. And it's important to note that because most phone chargers, without having like some kind of specialized quick charging protocol, will only do about 2. So it's usually, unless you know your power supply will work, it's usually probably a better idea to avoid the issue entirely and just go with the Raspberry Pi branded one. And the Raspberry Pi branded one isn't even that expensive to begin with. It's like $7 at Micro Center. Just make sure you get a faster SD card, so class 10 UHS-3, that's how it should be marketed. And you can write a Pi image with the link that I have on the slides. So, a few tips and tricks here. I mentioned this earlier, but you can use a PiZero as USB only. So you can plug this in with one cable to the data on the computer, and if you configure the Pi correctly, it will just let you SSH into it from a computer. I highly recommend if you get a PiZero to configure it this way. It actually makes it a lot more useful, at least for me. And you can still use it with like Wi-Fi and stuff in addition. So it's not like you're limited to just USB Ethernet. You can also, another thing you should know about is you can also set up Wi-Fi credentials beforehand. So if you're trying to set up one of these in a headless scenario where you're never going to connect it to a display or a keyboard, what you can do is you can move 2 config files to the boot partition after you image the Pi, and it will just set itself up in a way where that configuration file gets copied over, and you can just SSH into it right off the get-go. And you can find more information about that in the link over there. And that's about it. Do we have any questions?
What is the jankiest use of a pi you've ever seen?
It's the jankiest use of a Pi I have ever seen. Oh, that's a very good question.
Or heard of?
I know someone who actually uses a Pi as not a daily computer, but like a secondary computer and keeps Gmail up on it. That's, I mean, it might not be the most janky thing in the world, but also like that these Pis are not quite the fastest, and Gmail is enough to slow some of them down, especially the older ones. Also, the garage door that you saw that's pretty janky too. The way I had that set up is I started writing an app for it, and then I just realized that I could like put an icon on the desktop of my phone that just automatically SSH'd in and ran the script. So I just did that instead. So that was pretty jank. But other than that, any other questions? I cannot read that. Can you help me out here?
I forgot you're blind.
I am blind.
Any
Thank you, glasses. I really appreciate it.
any ideas on using Pis for security research from Brad?
Yeah. So one good example of this is, remember the hardware stuff I was talking about? If you have a hardware device that you're trying to do some research on, having access to the serial pins and the GPIO pins of Raspberry Pi can be super helpful. You'd be very surprised at the number of hardware devices that have open serial ports that you can just like use a Pi to gain effectively console level access to. One example of that would be, I was reading that you can do this with the Philips Hue bridge. Like the smart light bulb solution, you can literally just plug in two wires on a console, do some janky stuff, and you can get enough access to root the device. I don't know why you would want to root your Philips Hue bridge, but that would be an example of security research used with a Raspberry Pi. Any other besides me? This looks sketchy.
Thanks, Enzo. More like thanks, Josh. Yeah, I don't think there's any more.
Awesome. All right. If you have any questions, reach out to me on Workplace. And hey, where do you think I got all of